The Rebel Capitalist Show.
You're someone that's really done a lot of research into like the SDR and into the IMF and
Yes.
the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
And then you've been talking about a monetary reset
Yes.
for a long time.
Mhm.
So understanding what we're dealing with now, we've got the dollar network. I always look at a fiat currency system as kind of a network, because you've got lending, you've got that creates further demand for the currency in the future, and you've got
Right.
businesses using it. You've got a network now of the Chinese digital yuan. I think they're
Yep.
starting to grow that, trying to.
Oh yeah, they are.
You've got a Bitcoin network
Mhm.
that's trying to expand. And then you've got the IMF and the World Economic Forum that's pushing a digital SDR as the global reserve asset of choice by these global central banks. And then, of course, you've got gold and silver on the side. So with everything that's at play right now and those specific items we just were referring to, how do you see it playing out? Like what wins and how does it look when we get to that point?
Well, I can't say exactly what's going to win, right? But we are in the thick of the battle and it's definitely heating up. And gold and silver have been in this battle for so long that they are sitting over here on the sidelines, almost unnoticeable, which is perfect, quite honestly.
Right.
Because you definitely can see the cryptocurrency space now under attack, in China and also in the US with the new taxes coming out on it, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know who's going to win that battle, but I cannot really see central banks just handing over the power of the payment system to private entities without this huge battle.
Right.
But I still do think that the SDR is the best positioned because it's been around since 69. People don't realize that, but it's been around since 1969. And that too is fully integrated throughout the global system. I mean, you can go to the post office and in their search bar, put in SDR and you'll find it. The same thing with the airlines. So I still think the SDR ends up being the world reserve currency. And of course, it's not physical anyway, so it's going to be digital, but then everything would pass through the IMF. And when you understand that the members of the IMF are treasury secretaries and central bank chiefs, that gives them total control. And I think we can also see with the blockchain technology that the goal is to have all assets registered on blockchain. Now, for governments, that gives them the ability to do lifetime taxes, which is something they've been talking about. And, but it would all be controlled through the IMF. So unless there is indeed a revolution, and we'll see, unless there is indeed a revolution, I think the IMF is the one that's going to come out running the whole show and expanding that monetary basket to include all of its members so that you then have, the FEDcoin. And I think they will allow, they're going to have to, because you can see how quickly Wall Street is adopting the cryptocurrencies. So, if we're in that regime with all of that, with all of the ability to influence the government, I think that it will survive. I don't think it's going to survive at the levels that it's at. It can go up even higher, but, and I can even see some of the utility, but to me, that's where the speculation is. And that's also where the battle royale is taking place right now. And I feel like that battle is heating up.
Do you think if we had like a hyperinflationary type of event, let's say 50% inflation per year, and the only way to really get out of a hyperinflationary event is to instill confidence
Correct.
in something, right? And do you think that if people lost faith in the global dollar monetary system because of the rampant inflation, that it would be solved, or that confidence would be instilled with the SDR? Maybe the question is, do you think people gravitate toward the SDR, or do you think it's imposed upon them by the central planners?
Well, okay, what we know, what history tells us, is that we're going to have, on average, a currency resets before we get to that point that you're talking about 3 times. Will it be more? Will it be fewer this time? I don't know. But no, I don't think that the SDR imposed on the population is what's going to generate confidence, unless they put, and they've talked about this, they put a component of gold into the SDR, which would then stabilize the monetary system. That's why governments always go back to gold after a hyperinflationary event, because that's really the only way to instill that confidence.
Right.
And I don't see them putting a component of, the crypto space is way too volatile. It's not really going, and people still don't understand it. You have to be an engineer in that space in order to fully understand it, or maybe engineers in general can. I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but I was married to one once, so a long time ago. But no, I think that's where the gold comes in, and I think that it's not going to be 100% gold back,
Right.
but I think it'll have a percentage in there, and that's what they will use to instill the confidence, because that's what history tells us. Could this time be different? Well, of course, but is it likely to be different this time? It usually isn't. So I don't think so.
So do you think that in this kind of end game scenario, that gold goes up in real terms or just nominal terms? And I guess not even as measured by dollars, but measured by the amount of goods and services that it can purchase. Do you think it just purchases the same amount of goods and services or more? And if so, why more?
Well, because what a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. So it's kind of like you have a spring in your hand and you're holding your hand on that spring, and you can keep it there and keep it there and keep it there. But when they reset the currency, they're releasing that spring. And then you'll see gold in nominal terms go up somewhere near its fundamental value. At the same time, we know right now that real assets, other than gold and silver, are severely overvalued.
Right.
So everything in terms of real assets, everything goes from undervaluation to fair valuation, to overvaluation to fair valuation to undervaluation.
Okay.
And it always overshoots one way or the other. It's just the way that it works. So history also tells us that this is when you will be able to expand that purchasing power. You can't really go so much by what it can buy you today versus that's just going to stay the same in the future, because the valuations are so cattywampus right now. Right. And I can tell you, on average, 25 ounces of gold would buy an entire city block, buildings and all, during this kind of reset event. 25 ounces.
So, yeah, but then that's assets. So I think maybe it's like kind of a 1970s type of event where gold, you would have maintained your purchasing power relative to goods and services, but you would have increased your purchasing power significantly relative to other assets, such as the S&P 500, which most people forget went down in nominal terms by 50% from 1972 to 1974. If you would have held your gold during that period, even if you could have purchased the same amount of groceries in 1974, you would have been able to purchase double the amount of shares of IBM or whatever was popular back then.
Yeah, IBM was. I remember my daddy sold a house and we had an IBM in Kingston. And I remember my father sold, as he had in his development, he sold this house to this nice young couple. And I remember, I don't know why this always stuck in my head, but I was standing in the doorway because they worked out of the house, and the couple had just left. And my mother bangs her fist on the table and she goes, "He's a comer. He's a comer. He makes $12,000 a year." Well, the average wage then was $9,500. So if you made $12,000 a year, you actually were quite comfortable.
Yeah.
He was an engineer for IBM. So just a
Yeah.
little aside that always stuck with me, because what happens if you make $12,000 a year now?
Exactly. And that goes back to your point of the Fed being really the main contributor to the wealth gap, and that
Totally.
it's forced people to speculate from a standpoint, if you're always getting that 2% compounded inflation, and you know that incomes aren't going to keep pace with inflation, they're always going to be a bit of a lag there. The only way that you can get ahead, especially if you have these long-term bouts where real interest rates are negative, that you've got to go out there and speculate, because you can't keep your money in the bank, and then that creates this boom bust cycle that inevitably the average Joe and Jane will be the last to the party, and they're the ones that are going to get screwed. And then you just have this cycle of wealth destruction with the poor and the middle class over and over and over and over again. And then the next boom cycle, they all try to get in, and it all comes crashing down. Yeah, if you just had that sound money.
Totally. I mean, if you went on the IMF website and you put in the search bar financial repression, you can see that that's one of their strategies, and that's exactly what you were referring to.
Yeah.
And that is, and so, yeah, it is the Federal Reserve. It is. And what happened back in 71 was that Nixon handed over full control of inflation to the central banks, to the Federal Reserve. Here, you take this ball. Well, we see how well that's worked. I mean, we basically have no purchasing power left in the dollar. And, lately, I don't know if you've noticed this, but, I listen to mainstream TV so I can understand what they're talking about and the garbage that they're selling. And I have recently heard them mention purchasing power and how, well, it's going up, but the purchasing power is not is going down. And I just about was floored, because I never hear them referring to purchasing power. And they recently started referring to it, in terms of inflation, certainly. And I thought that was very telling. It tells you that we're really going to a new level on this whole thing, and including the inflation.
Yeah. Do you get uncomfortable when you find yourself agreeing with CNBC or the mainstream media?
Doesn't happen often.
That's my point.
Yeah. No, usually when that happens, like them talking about purchasing power, what I hear is that things have shifted. It's a shift, right? Because then, of course, in the next breath, they talk out of this side of their mouth and they talk out of that side. Usually it's like, oh, let me out. If I could reach my hands through the screen and throttle them, I would absolutely do so most of the time. But I use it as first of all, I need to know what they're telling people, what lies they're telling people, so that I can debunk it. But it also lets me know, oh, okay, they're starting to talk about purchasing power. That's pretty telling that we've gone to a new level in the whole system. And they also talk about how insane everything is. But as long as you've got interest rates on the 10-year at 1.55, well, the S&P and the NASDAQ, they should all be a lot higher.
Infinity, right.